Ladies and gentlemen, sports fans alike, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. One of the couple, two, three best podcasts around. So sit back, grab yourself a cold one and a Polish sausage, park your keister in the French room, and listen to Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
In Chicago, you know that all sports rock. The Bears, Hawks, Bulls, Cubs, and Sox. Pick your favorite, you can choose. As long as the Packers lose. For everything you need to know, it's Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Bill Swerski, Sports Talk Chicago. This is your hosts, Alex and Sean. On this episode, we're going to be talking about possibilities of what the Bears might do with this number 3 draft pick. We're going to be talking about the offensive guards in the NFL draft, talking a little bit of Bulls, and talking Blackhawks on their winning streak. All of this and more on this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. But first, as always, I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Rockford Ice Hogs. If you're not familiar with the Rockford Ice Hogs, they're the AHL minor league affiliate of the Chicago Blackhawks. What does that mean for you? You get to see the stars of tomorrow today at family-friendly, affordable prices. Tickets starting at just $10. You can have fun for the whole family, only 90 minutes from the city limits. Check them out at icehogs.com. Get tickets, jerseys, hats, and more. Tell them Swerski Sports sent you. Welcome back, Alex. How have you been, my friend?
Been doing pretty well. How have you been?
I can't complain. Can't complain at all. It seems like, knock on wood, we have no audio issues and no technical difficulties this week.
Yeah, let's hope it stays that way. I mean, my earphone settings might be a little weird, but I can hear you mainly through one ear, and it seems like everything's going all right. So if that works, I guess just keep trucking on forward.
So this hasn't been a tremendously busy week, so this probably won't be that long of an episode. We've got a little bit of Cubs news, some baseball news in general, the offensive guards in the draft, a little bit of Bulls, a little bit of Blackhawks. What would you like to start with, my friend?
Well, I think we could start with a little bit of Blackhawks. They are playing tonight.
They are. It's a late game, and I'm glad it's a Saturday night because I don't have anything to do tomorrow, so I can actually stay up and watch it.
Yeah, you know, those late games on the West Coast, and especially in Canada, too. I mean, I remember weekdays where I wanted to watch a lot of it, but, you know, you really can't. So, kind of nice that we could watch it now.
Yeah, I remember, God, a couple of years ago, there was a game, and it was an exciting game. It went into overtime, but it was one of those really late starts. And they went into the intermission quick before they went into overtime. And I'm like, oh man, I'm tired. I gotta go to bed, but I gotta watch this game because it's a really good game. And I'm like, I'm just gonna shut my eyes for a second. And I wake up and I'm like, oh man, did somebody score? Is this a commercial? No, it was like an hour over after the game. I had been sleeping like an hour. It was like all the highlight shows and stuff. I just completely slept through it.
Yeah, and I believe tonight is the debut in the new Edmonton arena, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think we've played there before.
I don't think so. So this week has been a good week for the Blackhawks.
The first time in a few weeks because they were hitting a bit of a skid there.
Yeah, so they're back to 4-game winning streak, and I mean, the good news is they seem to be finding a groove and, just the right time. But the bad news is that Minnesota is just a freight train, and they're not slowing down, and they just keep pace with the Blackhawks. So although the Blackhawks have pretty much firmly cemented in that number 2 spot, they're not getting any closer than 5 points from the Minnesota Wild.
Yeah, you know, and I think about that whole thing, and I know what the Hawks are capable of in the playoffs. I'm really not too concerned about getting the number 1 overall spot. If Minnesota gets it, it's not a big deal because we know we're going to the playoffs, barring a collapse of historical epic proportions. But we know we're going to the playoffs, and it's going to be interesting in the West considering what the lower seeds and the wild cards are going to be because it's kind of up for grabs. You have St. Louis, who just fired Hitchcock, and we'll see if they can get back on track. You have the LA Kings there. You have the Oilers who are, in the playoff hunt, and they're in a spot right now. I believe they'd be in the playoffs if the season ended today. So there's a lot of teams, and it's pretty open for a lot of teams. But right now, it seems like the Hawks and the Wild are your slates for 1 and 2. And yeah, like you said, the Wild don't seem to be slowing down by any means. But, it really doesn't matter in the regular season to the Hawks much anymore. If they just get in the playoffs, anything's possible for them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You're right. The Pacific, it's your standard 1 and 2 with San Jose and Anaheim, and they're good teams, but again, they don't scare me in the playoffs just because of their track record. Edmonton is a really good team. They're the number 3 seed or the 3 seed in the Pacific, but they're just so young. They don't have the experience, but they're a talented team. St. Louis, like you mentioned, is just they're a little bit of a hot mess right now, even though they have a fairly decent record. And then you got the Kings in Nashville, and Nashville is still they're sans players. They're not playing well.
Right.
I mean, even if any of those teams behind them catch up, like you're looking at Dallas, Vancouver, and Calgary, I'm not that worried about any of those teams.
No.
So realistically, it's Minnesota is the one team that is a really bad matchup for the Blackhawks, and if they're as it is right now, they won't play each other early, so I'm okay with it.
Absolutely, because like you said, Nashville is very underwhelming from what we thought they were going to be. The LA Kings aren't the LA Kings they were from 2011 to 2014. Vancouver, nowhere near what they were 6-7 years ago when they won those President's Trophies. And some might just kind of squeak in as a wild card, whether it's like a Flames or one of those types of teams. We'll see, because like we said, it's kind of open. But the Wild are the toughest matchup for the Blackhawks in the West. I think there is very little question about that. This is not the same Blues team of years past. They lost some key pieces, and we'll see what happens to them in the future. We'll see if they can maintain any of this, because I know they have some contracts coming up, and they need a lot of cap space to sign a lot of these guys. So we'll see what happens with them. The biggest rivalry of the Hawks, one of their toughest challengers the past 3-4 years. Things are changing. Because the Wild used to be that team a few years ago when they'd go on a nice winning streak mid-season, and then they'd get into the playoffs, but they were never really good enough to go anywhere. This year, the Wild actually have potential to go somewhere. Now, we've also said that the past 2 years, but they haven't gone anywhere. So, yes, I think they're a tough matchup for the Hawks. But I honestly will not take them seriously until they actually do something come April and May into June. Because they've done that before.
Yeah, a lot of the teams that were the foes of the Blackhawks just, a couple short years ago, the way they were built was to be big, physical, and tough, because everyone thought that was the recipe to beat the Blackhawks.
Especially St. Louis.
Yeah, St. Louis and Nashville and Minnesota, they were built like this. They were built to be these big, tough teams to put, hurt on the Blackhawks. And we saw time in and time out that doesn't work. So these teams are starting to reload with more skill players, and that's where you're matching up well is outskate the Hawks, is be younger and faster than the Blackhawks. I'm looking quickly at what the NHL playoff bracket would be right now if the playoffs were to start today. Blackhawks would have St. Louis, and I think honestly that would be a fairly easy series. Then they would go on to play the winner of Minnesota versus the LA Kings. And although the LA Kings aren't playing that great, I think they're they're a tough matchup for the Minnesota Wild because
And you've
of
seen what they've done in the playoffs before, even as a low seed.
Yeah, is if Mike Quick can get hot again, is they're as good as anybody. I mean, they're older and they're not as potent as they were a few years ago, but this is still a dangerous team just because of the playoff experience and their goaltending, and they could be a big problem for the Wild, and that would be awesome if they could knock the Wild out and the Blackhawks could face the Kings in round 2.
I would love the ultimate revenge against the Kings after 2014, after what was no doubt the most heartbreaking loss in the Kane and Tays era of the Blackhawks. I would love to have revenge on them, no doubt.
That would be awesome to have another face-off, because this might realistically could be one of the last years that these two teams are realistic possibilities of winning a Stanley Cup and still playing each other in the playoffs.
Right, and it's really amazing to see how much has changed in the West since, 2008, 2009. And the Hawks have always been one of the number one contenders, with exception of the 1 year in 2011 when the salary cap just destroyed the Blackhawks after their first cup. But if we winded the clocks back to about 2010, 2011, the mediocre Vancouver Canucks in the regular season back then were the cream of the crop. They had back-to-back President's Trophies. They had Luongo, who I think was a Vezina winner 1 year, and that team was just a powerhouse. And then, the Blues and the Wild really weren't in the thick of it much at the time. And then you had other teams like Calgary had a pretty long playoff streak going that ended in 2009. And the LA Kings were starting to become the powerhouse that they became in 2012 through 2014. It's really interesting to see the way things change. I mean, the Avalanche used to be consistently in the playoffs. You had, I know it's not the Western Conference, but there was a time when the Hurricanes were regularly around that time in the playoffs. Not the case anymore. You also had the Red Wings in the West, and they were obviously, the dynasty team of the 2000s. So it's really kind of fun to look at how it's changed. But the Blackhawks, since 2008, 2009, from then till now, they've been the consistent contenders throughout, because it seems like every year there was a new team in the West coming in saying, wow, look at them. In 2014, it was the St. Louis Blues, and it was really satisfying knocking them out. And then you had the Wild emerge in 2014 as well. And then you had Nashville kind of up and down. They were up when we played them in the first round in 2010. Then they took a dive for a few years. Then they came back up, and now they're kind of taking a dive again. So it's really interesting to see the way things change. Heck, the Coyotes used to be in the playoffs. They beat us that 1 year. They made it to the conference finals.
And I don't know. A little bit of me is, as much as I would like to see the matchup of the LA Kings and the Minnesota Wild, I kind of want Calgary Flames to make the playoffs. The more Canadian teams, the happier I am, because usually the television ratings will be a little better as you get all the Canadians there, and just a little more excitement with the playoffs. Whereas LA Kings I remember the last time they won the Stanley Cup is, if you looked at their parade, it was like nobody there. It was just empty.
No, it was small. The ratings weren't good. If you look at the overall ratings in the playoffs, the past, let's just say 10 some years when the game has been on NBC, you see the highest ratings are when A, Canadian teams are involved, or B, original six teams are involved. Look at last year. Look at Penguins versus Sharks, and then look at, Blues versus Sharks in the conference finals. No one was really watching it. No one cared. But when you had, the Blackhawks and the Red Wings, or some of the Canadian teams going to the playoffs, the ratings were much higher. So, yeah, I would definitely agree with you there.
I mean, at least with Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh has, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the highest local ratings of the NHL teams. But that it's the rating, so it's not. It's based on percentage of households that are watching. It's much higher than anywhere else, but it's also not that big of a market comparatively to LA or Chicago or New York.
Yeah, ratings can be subjective.
Yeah, but at least with Pittsburgh being in there, if it was, if you had another Blackhawks, Bruins, or even back to before you were alive, I think when I was a kid, the Blackhawks versus the Penguins.
Just before my time.
And you have, these are strong hockey cities, and they're national sports cities. It's not like a podunk town. So you get a strong interest. If you get a San Jose, it's not a hockey town. You were to get a Columbus, not a hockey town.
No.
Phoenix. Yeah. Nashville.
Right.
I like the city of Nashville. It's just not a hockey town.
Right. Doesn't have the fan base of an original 16.
Yeah, what would be amazing is Blackhawks versus Maple Leafs.
Oh, the ratings would be through the roof.
Yeah, because all the haters of Toronto, which I'm not involved in because I'm not Canadian, and that's a different conference, all the haters would be there just waiting for them to collapse. All the loyalists of the Maple Leafs would be so excited to be back in the Cup Finals.
Be like the Cubs in the World Series.
This would be like the Cubs versus the Yankees.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a World Series I'd love to see. Speaking of ratings, I read an article recently on the Blackhawks local TV ratings. And they kind of charted them since they came back in 2007 when Rocky Wirtz brought them back on television. And you see the bar graph, obviously. It started in 2009, then it shot up in 2010, then it kind of leveled, and then it hit its absolute peak in 2013, and then it's dropped a little more, and then this year, it's as low as it's been since, I think before 2010, just when they were starting to get good again. And it asked the question, why is this? And there was one person who said, I think it was the person who wrote the article, and he said, is it because the, quote, honeymoon is over? The fact that the Hawks have won these championships, and they're clearly regressing to what they were a few years ago, that the interest to watch regular season hockey just isn't there. The way I see it is, I think people just really kind of care about the playoffs more than anything because they realize at this point, the Hawks are going to get to the playoffs, so why watch 82 meaningless games? I don't know. I kind of want to get your take on that.
I was going to, when you started giving the numbers, I was like, I bet this year's pretty low. I think a few years ago, it had to, regular season hockey, it was for people that were just getting into hockey.
Right.
Which, the new fans or fans that had given up for years because they weren't on TV and they weren't going to the games.
Right.
Renewed interest. These people, it was like must-see TV, and all the talk of possible Stanley Cup championships. And, we've won 3 in this era. And now most of the news talking about the Blackhawks is downer news, not upper news, even though they're playing very well and they're I think they have the second best record in the conference. So I think that has an effect on it. The fact that sports talk radio and ESPN and things don't cover hockey anymore.
No, they don't. They've had a feud with hockey ever since they left them.
Yeah, so that's a big impact. And then the fact that I think it's a little bit of fatigue. Is hockey. I love hockey, and it's a little bit of a long season. I'm not in a bad way, but it's a long season.
Yes, it is.
So I think a lot of fans that are just more casual fans, they're waiting for the playoffs to start.
Yeah,
and they're not even waiting for the first round. It's like Atlanta Braves type. When they won 14 division championships in a row, is people just didn't care about the regular season. They stopped even caring about the first round.
They didn't sell out NLDS games. They didn't.
No, it was World Series or bust.
Yeah.
And I think the Blackhawks are getting like that. And, you're always going to have your big core of fans. And I don't know how many people that are hockey fans that are not in Illinois. I know a lot of people, especially since I lived in a big hockey town in Philadelphia, and they all call most Blackhawks fans bandwagon fans. And,
Yeah, we get that everywhere.
And it's a bad label, but who cares? Who cares how people get into hockey is as long as they stick with the sport. But you see that
People only care when the team is good and they keep beating them.
yeah, and that's realistically what's happening is, people when all the talk is, oh, they're so great, they're so dominant, they're so this, then people are turning it in. Even if it's not for the whole game, they're watching parts of it at night. They're stopping when they're flipping around channels. They stop on either WGN or CSN, and they stop on the game and they watch for a period. And now they're just not doing that, and I think it's because a lot of times all the coverage you're hearing on sports talk radio is things like, oh, the Blackhawks are on a 3-game losing streak, or the Blackhawks are 5 points behind Minnesota with 2 games in hand. Like, okay,
Right.
who cares? This team is still a really good team with superstar players. Watch the games. It's not like baseball where you have to commit to a 3+ hour game. It's hockey. These periods go by so fast because there's so few actual commercial breaks. The period goes by like nothing.
Right.
Sit down, watch the game, enjoy it, and it doesn't take up your whole evening.
Yeah, exactly. Because, you got those breaks in between, and, baseball, you don't have those breaks in between. And, you think about the 2013 regular season, and it was the shortened season. It started in January. So I think a lot of people were tuning in because they just really missed hockey and they wanted to watch it again. And it also helped that the Blackhawks were on that historic streak, that historic point streak, and that just brought people's interest more and more up. And I think you could argue that Blackhawks team was the best Blackhawks team ever, if not one of the top Blackhawks teams ever. Because everyone was in their prime. Some people were just hitting their prime, still really young. When you think about when they got Brandon Saad that year, when they brought him up, what a godsend he was. Everyone was playing at the top of their potential that year. And they had a wonderful season, even though it was shortened, and they won the Stanley Cup. So I think there were multiple factors that really drew in people for that season because it was shortened, because it was on that historic winning streak. And like you said, by now, people just kind of want to watch playoffs at this point. The season is so long, 82 games, spread out. It's not like consecutive. They're spread out over months. I mean, I love watching hockey like any other, and I watch as many games as I can, but I know not everyone really does. They're just like, I'll catch a game every now and then, but I don't go to my way to watch most games, but I like watching most games. So, it's kind of interesting to think about the whole thing. They also said, to be fair, the ratings at the beginning of the Blackhawks season were horrible, but that's because of the Cubs. So, that's a good reason right there.
Yeah, the Cubs pretty much screwed up a lot of things for a lot of people.
Screwed up the Bears, screwed up the Hawks.
Yeah, so the Bears felt the effect, the Blackhawks felt the effect. Sure, the Bulls felt the effect. The White Sox definitely felt the effect. So it was and good rate for the city, but baseball, when anytime your team wins a championship, and other than football really doesn't, it's a fairly short playoff period.
Right.
It's like five weeks or so. It's whereas hockey, it's forever. And it's like another season. And
right.
Baseball is long too.
Which is, when you think about how much hockey you play in the playoffs, if you go deep, and you think about 3 years where the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup in 2 of them and made it to Game 7 of the conference finals in the other, how much hockey that is over a 3-year span for them to play, That's a ton. And you can just tell in the 2015 playoffs, in that run of the Cup, it seemed like they squeezed every last inch of energy in them to get that Stanley Cup because the fatigue really caught up to them last year.
Oh, absolutely. But, this week is this been... Hopefully we get a good spin on this, and as far as the news and the sports talk shows about the Blackhawks is, the 4-game winning streak here, and it's on a road trip on the West Coast, which is a hard thing to do because you're playing at a weird time. It's several time zones away, and they're teams you don't see as often. So it's a road trip, so you don't get that home bounce that you do with playing on the East Coast where you can bounce back and forth. But although this hasn't been the best teams they've played, Dallas, the Jets, it's been teams that have really stuck it to the Blackhawks recently.
Especially the Jets.
Yeah, so the Jets, they wouldn't make the playoffs right now. But even though they're a talented team, they wouldn't make the playoffs. But they've just been a thorn in the Blackhawks side, and the Blackhawks. Yeah, and it was night. I mean, the score looked better than it was. It was but the Blackhawks played a great game. Those two padded empty netters helped. But you beat Minnesota, you beat Dallas. Those are all teams that you've had trouble with over the past season.
Yeah, I mean, remember last year when we got destroyed by Dallas? I mean, this year, it's been the opposite. We've beaten them up pretty good. And then years past, we've beaten the Jets pretty good. This year, not so much.
Yeah, and Minnesota is I think they have the best record in hockey.
They gotta be. They gotta be at least top 3. I know they're top in the West, obviously. I don't know about the teams in the East. I don't pay attention to the East as much. I just know who's kind of good in the East.
So it's it's nice to get that win. It would have been nice to get 2 points out of that Minnesota game, but it is what it is. Up into that Jets game on Friday night is quietly Jonathan Toews with that overtime goal against Minnesota has 11 points in his last 7 games.
Mm-hmm.
Captain Sirius is starting to heat up, which is really bad for the rest of the teams in the East, because if you're starting to see that second line of the Blackhawks pick it up a little bit, they had a week or two lull in scoring. They're starting to pick it back up. Jonathan Toews is playing better. They had an all-around good game against the Jets. You're starting to see positive trending with the Blackhawks.
Absolutely, because you want your captain, who's one of the best captains in the NHL and who's been so consistent over his year, over his career, to refine his consistency this year, because we saw a very long, frustrating stretch for Toews this year. And you're thinking, Toews, when he goes into slumps, it's usually maybe a few games, but this is longer than usual. But at the same time, you're saying he's going to snap out of this. We know he's going to snap out of this. It's just a matter of when. And he's finally snapping out of it. I get all the, Toews is overrated, or the, they should trade Toews, it's over. That kind of stuff just is ridiculous.
No, I mean, if I don't know how many of you guys listening out there have had back injuries or even stiff sore backs. They affect everything you do.
Absolutely.
And when you're playing a sport as physical as hockey, it involves a lot of skating and stopping and starting and speed. It's hard. I mean, when I turned 30, I sneezed one day and I threw my back out, and I felt like a 200-year-old man. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Sanford and Son, but I'm walking around like Fred Sanford. I got one hand on my back and the other one up in the air, like, I'm waving at everybody, trying to keep my balance. And I was like 30 years old. It's not a joke, and he's had back injuries this year, and regardless, I mean, he's going to play if as long as he's physically able to play, the man's going to play. But if he's not at 100%, you're going to see that effect on the ice, and that's what you were seeing. Is regardless of whether he's on the injury report or whether he was attributing to his back, I'm positive that it was lingering back problems. Not that it was like, he's playing injured. It's just, if your back is still sore or stiff, it really affects everything you do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that was definitely part of it. There were other things too. He wasn't getting the bounces, and sometimes it happens, but I think that's a very good point to make, and I think you're probably right on that right there. And what's funny? When you talk about sneezing and hurting your back, do you remember when Sammy Sosa did that?
Yep.
That's exactly what it made me think of.
Yeah, it was I always laughed about that. It was like me and Sammy Sosa hurt ourselves sneezing. But yeah, so he's starting to play much better, which is good. And against the Wild, they'd snapped an 8 regular season losing streak to the Wild. Yeah. Which I had to go back and start looking. I was like, that can't be right. But they haven't beat the Wild in a long time in the regular season. But the one thing I wanted to point out to this is I'm gonna take a wild stab that you agree with me that offsides no call was the worst officiating I've ever seen. And the thing is of the major sports, I've always said that I think hockey far and away is the best officiating in all sports. Yes. Basketball is far and away the worst. Football is, it alternates with baseball is, the second, and it's on a bit of a downtrend right now. And baseball's on a little bit of an uptrend with the instant replay and such, but hockey has been far and away for as fast as the game is. Those officials are great, and I love that they have former players being officials because they know what's going on. They've been there, they've seen it first from playing it, and then they're officiating. It's great, and the way they do replays, where they do it and go to Toronto for the replays, and they just get the call back on the ice. It's fantastic. I don't know what happened in that when that offsides replay on the Zach Parise goal.
There's no possible way with 19 different angles these days that they could have said that was inconclusive. It was as clear as day, and I thought, okay, this review will take about 10 seconds and it'll be offsides and no goal. Instead, it took 10 minutes. They were talking Toronto on an iPhone, and they said it was inconclusive, and they got the call wrong. And I was stunned, because that was
the only
brutal.
thing I can think of. The only thing I can think of is there was technical issues in Toronto, and they didn't want to admit that and sound stupid that they have technical glitches, and they just went to go, well, what are we going to do? And like that one commercial with the NFL refs where he had, like, did anybody see it? And he had the microphone still on. This is one where they're like, we can't look stupid. We're just going to say it's inconclusive.
Yeah, I had a similar feeling like that. I had a similar feeling because you saw how long it took. Like, I think they were trying to maybe get something working, and they couldn't. So they were just trying to keep delaying, and that's why it took so long on a call that was blatantly obvious.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine if they were to come out and said, and no league. I mean, that's pretty par for the course with all the 4 major sports. Is they will defend officiating, and they'll defend themselves, and they never want to admit we made a mistake or we're fallible. And I'm fine with it. I'm honestly, like, if they were to say, hey, listen, we had a brief power outage or something, or computers went down for a minute and we didn't have the replay and we had to go with the ruling on the ice. I'm fine with that because on the ice, it's a bang bang play and it happens so quickly. But the reason the rest of us we can be so blatant about our indignation is if you can see an actual snapshot, like a still of it being offsides.
Right.
Like, it's completely offsides. So that's where we're upset. But I mean, on the ice, I understand it. That's offsides is
it's very hard.
yeah, when you're standing there, it's just like boom. It's when you're, especially the whole length of the ice, that somebody's offsides. You're like, all right, well I got to look here and there at the same time. A little bit hard, but I wish the NHL would have said, hey, listen, we technical difficulties, we don't have the replay. We have to go with what's on the ice. I can accept that much more than, well, we looked at it, it was inconclusive, because that's a lie.
Right. Here's my question. What do they need to do this Toronto thing for? Can't they just have the replay monitor by one of the scoring officials on the side there? Like, you had the goal judge for the longest time, and you still see the goal judge in a number of hockey arenas that sits in that little glass box right behind the net. I know they have it at the Allstate Arena with the Wolves. I don't know exactly. I don't really look into the AHL refereeing rules, so I'm not sure if every arena has that. But, I mean, wouldn't that be less risk of a miscommunication? I mean, I guess I just don't understand the whole war room thing.
I mean, I don't either, but I think where it's nice is you have NHL employees. There's no bias there. You're going to have all the best angles, and you're going to be able to confer with an officiating official. So like a boss of the officials. You can confer with them. You can consult rule books if necessary. You can, you don't have the pressure of however many thousands of people watching you. I think it adds a neutrality to it. So I'm fine with that. And 999 times out of 1,000, it's pretty darn good. So if it's this one time, it's bad. It sucks that it happened with our team, and it cost the Blackhawks, gaining a point in the standings. But I think it's worked out well, and I don't want to, as we'll talk about when we get to baseball, is why mess with something if it's working, even if it messes up one time out of however many.
Yeah, I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm just saying I don't know why they did that in the first place, but you make some good points. You make the whole thing about the bias and whatnot, and I get that. It does make sense when you put it that way. It's you don't see something like that in other sports, so it's definitely unique.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the NHL official that has to go and look under the hood and that camera. That's got to be nerve-wracking, is that there's 50, 60,000 people live, like, in proximity to you at the stadium looking at you, plus a million people or whatever at home all staring at you, and they're all looking at your decision you made. That's got to be a little bit of a pressure. And so it's nice. Like, I think it's good for the officials is they don't have to do that. Is that just goes that gets farmed out to Toronto. The war room decides, they send it back, they just make the announcement. And I think it's better for the officials. And I it's hard to say, but hopefully it's better for the game. It's hard, we can't compare. We don't have an apples to apples comparison.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Being a referee or an umpire or anything like that, it's so easy to get mad at them, but it is such a hard job. I mean, look at hockey and how fast everything happens. Look at basketball, how fast everything happens. Look at baseball when you have to judge like a ball or a strike and the pitch is coming at you like at 90 plus miles an hour. And the NFL, when there is so much tackling and blocking, it's really just kind of hard to dig things out. Well, I mean, there's some I'd give more leeway than others, but
basketball basketball I give a lot less leeway, especially when they don't call like things like traveling, or their fouls are so just skewed. There was
some are kind of biased.
The other night, there was one where LeBron went for a breakaway dunk and missed the dunk, and he ran, instead of keeping the play alive, because the play was still going, he ran to an official to say he got fouled. And then the referee looked at him and just blew a whistle and pointed to somebody. And they showed the replay over and over. And nobody touched him. I mean, nobody even nobody was within 6 inches of him. And he just missed the dunk. And he wanted the foul because he looked silly. And they gave it to him. And that makes me honestly not want to watch the sport. I watch the Bulls, but I want to see traveling called. I want to see fouls that are fouls called.
Not bias against the superstars. Absolutely, I'd agree.
Yeah, and that's frustrating to me, and that's why I appreciate hockey so much, is because it's fair. It's not
right.
It's not somebody gets more calls than the other. It just they call what they call.
And in umpires in baseball, the strike zones just kind of vary from umpire to umpire, so you could have a small strike zone one day and a big the other. That's just kind of how the umpire is. It has nothing to do with the teams.
Yeah, and you sort of get the feel of that umpire because you have them several, a lot of times over the season. Is you're like, oh, I know this guy has a tight strike zone, or this guy has very tight on the outside corner, but on the inside corner he gives it all the way up to grazing the guy's jersey. Like, you just sort of get that feel.
Right.
And you get used to it. And you have scouting reports on not only the players, but the umpires as well. So as long as there's consistency within that person. So,
right.
Not, it doesn't even have to be with each other. Is like NFL crews. If you're like, oh, I know this crew is really calls ticky-tack, defensive back penalties, but this officiating crew doesn't, is you can use that to your advantage. Just as long as they're consistent across the board.
Right, absolutely. And you know what? I think, like you said, basketball you have the least leeway with. I agree. Next step, there are times the NFL, I think it's pretty blatant who they can favor, especially when it comes to quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But, I mean, since we started on the topic, I don't want to talk too much about the Bulls because they're really infuriating.
Yeah.
With their blowout loss to one of the worst teams in basketball, in the Suns. But let's talk a little bit the Bulls. They were without Jimmy Butler for a few games this week due to his heel injury, and without Jimmy Butler, they're a bad team. I mean, they're bad.
Yeah.
My buddy Gary, the one I've told you about, who is a season ticket holder, he keeps bringing up the argument. He's like, you should be able to watch and enjoy basketball. He's like, basketball can be fun even if you're not competing for titles. And I said, I agree with you. But he keeps bringing up, a couple of years ago, when you had the great bench, people coming off the bench, and it was fun. They were a fun team to watch. And I was like, I agree with you, but that was a different team with a different coach.
Absolutely.
This team is, you have some try-hard guys, and you've got the young talent that's supposed to be exciting to watch can't get minutes. They don't know their roles, and they can't play basketball. And you've got at the end of his line veteran who hates being here. And you've got a superstar who's not happy with the team, the team on the court. He's not happy with his team in the management camp, and he feels like he's indifferent. It's just not a fun product to watch this year.
It's not fun at all. I don't go out of my way to watch Bulls games. I can't remember the last time I went out of my way to watch a Bulls game. I've stopped caring. Every now and then, if I'm not doing anything and a game's on, I'll just kind of flick it on in the background. But I don't watch them like I used to. A few years ago, I watched as many games as I could. When they were competing for the Eastern Conference title, I watched as many games as I could because they were fun and entertaining. This is the last thing from fun and entertaining. And you don't want to support this franchise even more now that they pretty much guaranteed the safety of Gar Forman. I mean, unreal.
That's what I was going to bring up, is the Casey Johnson article, who... they wrote, I think I quoted it, is, in fact, ownership's trust in Paxson and Foreman remains so intact that they would be retained even if the Bulls missed the postseason for a second straight season, one source said. There's also an internal feeling that Foreman's publicly stated goal to remain competitive while overhauling the roster over several seasons to get younger and more athletic is working.
It's doing the opposite of that. We're not young. We're not athletic. I mean, is Jerry Reinsdorf lost what's left of his mind? That's ridiculous.
They think they're getting more younger and more athletic. But B is it's not working because
not at all.
Their young talent can't play. It's one thing if they were not athletic, but they could play. But they can't. This team has is the stark contrast of the Bulls playing against the Golden State Warriors this week is the Bulls can't shoot 3-pointers, period. And Golden State shoots 3-pointers really well. And the thing I took note of, I watched that game, and on a night that the Bulls were without Jimmy Butler and were without Dwayne Wade, and I know Dwayne Wade just couldn't play that game because he knew he'd be embarrassed, is without their two best players, Doug McDermott was scoreless in 8 minutes through 3 quarters and had 3 fouls.
Yeah, my brother tweeted that, and he's saying, this is a guy we traded for in the draft. So, yeah.
It's infuriating. I mean, that Gar Forman and John Paxson, who in the middle of the night when no one was listening, had a press conference that said we're going to get younger and more athletic and we're going to be held accountable. And neither of those things are true. They're alternative facts.
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're the opposite of what they've said they were going to do and what their team was going to be. And they build a team that's the opposite of what their coach plays.
I mean, who's more to blame for this particular team this season being this bad? John Paxson, Gar Forman, or Fred Hoiberg?
I would say the management.
Yeah, I'm going to agree. I think this team would be much, much better if Tom Thibodeau was the head coach.
Oh, sure.
The same group of players. But I don't think Fred Hoiberg can coach at this level.
No, he's over his head.
The reason that I'm saying Gar and Pax is because they handpicked this coach.
Right.
They said, we are going to do this, endless search to find the right coach. And they were like, it's Fred Hoiberg. And
yeah,
the funny
of all
part
people.
Is that news was the worst kept secret ever. Everybody knew it was going to be Fred Hoiberg.
Right.
And everyone went, that's a terrible decision. And then they were like, presto, we did it anyway.
Yep. And you know what? When they did that, I tried to keep saying to myself, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. He could introduce a good system. It's going to be okay. When you darn well knew that this was going to be a disaster. I almost tried to live in an old delusional world in an outlook with that. But, yeah, it didn't last long. I mean, look, I'm not excusing Hoiberg from anything by pointing my nose at the management because he's got no control over the team. He's not one to be a disciplinarian by any means. And he is not capable of keeping the egos of veterans like Wade and Rondo and Butler in check. And if that's the case, you're not fit to be an NBA coach because keeping egos in check is one of the biggest things to do. And he's a great college coach. That's what he should stick to. He's not an NBA coach.
It's funny. The other night I was just sitting there and I just started laughing. My wife was like, what are you laughing about? And I was reading an article how the Cleveland Cavaliers are losing money. They're not a profitable team because they're putting everything into whatever LeBron wants to try to get another title.
Yep.
And LeBron is publicly saying, we need more, we need this, we need that. And I was just trying to think, if he would have come to the Bulls, him going to Reinsdorf and saying, we need this, we need that, and Reinsdorf going, I will give you whatever it is you want, as long as we don't go into the luxury tax. My wife didn't understand, but I got a chuckle out of it.
That is kind of funny to think about. Just picturing LeBron trying to enthusiastically talk to Uncle Jerry. I mean, just picturing that scene is funny on its own.
God, this team. It's a disaster, and I don't see any possibility of getting better soon.
No. Nope. I don't either. I mean, clearly, they're not going to if they're going to retain all this. I mean, think about the White Sox right now. They are changing everything up. But the management is still the same, except Rick Hahn is calling the shots. Kenny Williams is literally just a figurehead. He's just there. But you know what? I guarantee you, if Kenny Williams was doing what he was doing with most other franchises, he would be long gone fired. If Robin Ventura was doing what he was doing, he would have been fired after the 2014 season. I mean, look at these other teams around, whether it's baseball, hockey, football, where there is so little leeway and so little loyalty to things like that. But when you get to Uncle Jerry's franchises, it's all about loyalty. Oh, hi, Fred Hoiberg, you're a former Bull. I liked you. You're a nice guy. You want to be our coach? I don't know about your qualifications, but I can guarantee you a job, and I can guarantee you job safety for a long time.
And with the White Sox is baseball has a set path to try to do a proper rebuild. Whether it works or not is depending on who does it, some luck and development. But basketball is much different. With basketball is the players that come out of the draft are expected to be contributors day one. There's not a lot of development time because you have like 4-year contracts. So you have that player for under a rookie contract for 4 years, and they have to produce in those 4 years. And this isn't like 15, 20 years ago where you were just got good players out of the draft. Is you're not getting these awesome players anymore.
Right.
There's in a draft, it's 2 rounds. There's a handful of guys that every year that are impactful players, whether that be good role players or solid starters, or if you're, when was the last time we had a superstar come out of the draft? Was it John Wall? Kyrie Irving? So it's been a few years before you've had a star come out of the draft.
Sure.
And so with the basketball there's no set path of how you get better. You get better by either lucking out and being the worst team and drawing the lottery pick when there's a game changer like a Kevin Durant or a LeBron James, or you do like the Bulls were doing before Derek got all his injuries. I guess they lucked out with Derrick Rose, but then they just started throwing money to get players around him. The Boston Celtics are doing a thing like the Bulls were doing after Derek was hurt, where they're like, we have a pretty good team and we're trying to figure out a way to get over the top without having LeBron James, Kevin Durant, or Steph Curry. And it's a tough go.
It really is. It's a very different sport. It's not, I guess it's not fair to compare like a baseball team and a basketball team, but what I'm just trying to kind of convey is this whole idea of how Jerry Reinsdorf refuses to make changes when things clearly don't work.
Yeah, I'm fine if, you had a good track record with Garpax and they had a couple of down years.
Right.
And they were like, hey, listen, this happened, it was out of our control. But that's not what's happening. Is they have a bad track record and they're still being given leeway. There's a time and a place for loyalty, and in sports is you get props, the most props for winning by any means necessary. Then you get second most props for being loyal to a sensible point. And then you start losing points when it's just you're loyal to just a stupid level.
Right. And that's what we've seen from Jerry Reinsdorf. We've seen stupid loyal to Gar Forman. We've seen stupid loyal to Robin Ventura. We've seen stupid loyal to Kenny Williams. We're seeing stupid loyal to Fred Hoiberg. You know, it's getting to a stupid level. I mean, what owner would think that this is doing an okay job when they are doing the opposite of what they said they do? Younger and more athletic, older, and one of the least athletic teams out there.
Yeah, so it's just, I don't know, it's such a frustrating team. I don't even want to talk about them anymore. They just make me want to bang my head against the wall. I hope they don't make the playoffs, because then people will give them some credit. I just want them to have no more credit at all.
Exactly. I am just rooting for them to keep losing. I like seeing them lose now. Isn't that sad?
Yeah, I want them to be in the lottery so I can sit there and go, they've got a 2% chance. They've got a 2% chance. They got a 2% chance to get, I don't even know who's coming out of the draft. Probably somebody. It's probably another year where the number one pick is going to be a meh player.
Kind of like a Michael Carter Williams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the Cubs this week had a couple of minor things, nothing major. They, switching gears a little bit, they signed free agent right-hander Williams Perez to a minor league contract. He saw some fairly extensive action the past 2 seasons in Atlanta, and he made 34 appearances, 31 starts, had a 5.18 ERA with a 5.3 K per 9 and 3.5 walks per 9 over 170 innings. And he's got a high ground ball percentage and a decent walk rate, 2.5 walks per 9 last year, and over 57% ground ball percentage. It's not that I think this is impactful per se, this particular signing, but we're seeing a trend of what the Cubs are trying to do. Is they're trying to find another reclamation project for starting, and they're clearly going after ground ball pitchers, because all these guys have in common is they're not walking a lot of guys, and they're ground ball pitchers. So that's something that's a key attribute clearly that Jed and Theo have identified, and they've signed several of these guys. I'm guessing hoping one pans out.
Yeah, and when you have a pitching coach like Bosio, and you compare the Braves' defense on ground balls to, say, the Cubs, there's quite a difference there. So you never know what you can do when you work with these players. I mean, look what they did with Jake Arrieta and Pedro Strop and Justin Grimm and Kyle Hendricks and all these guys. It's nice that they're signing these small, low-risk, high-reward deals, because when you score on them, you're getting a lot of value for a little money. It's the Moneyball idea, pretty much. And that's what Theo regards so highly, is the Moneyball type sabermetrics with a lot of these guys. So, it makes complete sense that they're doing it, and it doesn't surprise me in the slightest, because they know that pitching doesn't have a long shelf life in many instances, whether it's relievers or decent starters. I mean, obviously, if you're above average, you're going to have a long, nice career. But for a lot of, middle fill-in guys that are essential to teams these days, you see a lot of relievers and fifth starters just kind of come in and out of their prime. So they want to keep working more and more into that, because, the Cubs, who knows what's going to happen with Jake Arrieta and some of the bullpen guys in the future. So I really like the fact that they're doing this. That kind of reminds me, when you think of dominant closers, and tell me if you see the same pattern, because I feel like I, myself, and a lot of people see this pattern. They don't have, a 10-plus year of dominance. I mean, the rare ones are like Hoffman, Rivera, those kind of people. But a dominant closer this year can fall off the rails in the next few years. Because when you think about the dominant closers back a few years ago, they're no longer considered the dominant closer. Like Craig Kimbrell was once the best closer in baseball. He's not that anymore. Was that one guy, Bell, who was really good for a few years? He just completely fell apart and isn't even playing anymore. So, they just don't have these long shelf lives. So I think it's good that they're building up this depth of potential talent. Because if you can work with them, like they have in the past, you can get something out of them.
And if you think about it too, is pitchers, you hit the nail on the head there, is they don't have these long shelf lives anymore. Is think about how many, probably when you were very young, but like in my like heyday of being a kid watching baseball, there was a lot of guys who were racking up a lot of career wins, and 300 wins was like, this is a great number. Is look at the best players, the pitchers in baseball. Is there's nobody coming up in 300 wins. Who knows when we're gonna have another when and if we'll have another 300 game winner.
Who knows?
That's becoming a tough number to reach, and so you can draft these guys, but like arms are so the way these people pitch and some of the pitches they throw and what you need to pitch to get modern players out is these arms are not lasting. And so to spend these high draft picks on pitchers, it's a real crapshoot. Is when you get a bunch of guys. Look at the Mets. Is not last year, the year before, is they were riding high on those arms. Even they couldn't hit. They hit fire in the playoffs, but they couldn't hit during the regular season. But their pitching was so good. Last year is some players got injured, and they just weren't the same team. But with position players, is you don't see too many position players where they're getting these career-ending injuries, or they're an injury can just completely derail them from a career trajectory. But pitchers, that's the case. So
look at Pryor and Wood. Prime example right there.
And Mark Pryor was the guy who had those textbook mechanics that was, you're not going to get injured because these are perfect mechanics. And he had injuries. So the way, it would be nice to have some high draft picks at pitcher because, to be able to pair with what the Cubs have, now that they have a good roster of position players. But what they're doing now is a nice bridge, is because they're finding a lot of reclamation products. These guys, their arms are major league arms. They're in the majors, on the border of, they're like, I call quadruple A. They're too good for triple A, not quite good enough for the pros. And the Cubs are trying to, find the one that can get over that hurdle. And
the great thing about these quadruple A players is that you can develop them into something if you work with them properly. I've always said it's easier to work with a quadruple A, because I do like that term, quadruple A. It's easier to work in a quadruple A pitcher than it is a position player when it comes to hitting. I don't know if you think the same way, but that's always kind of how
I agree. It's especially because unknown pitchers have an advantage over unknown hitters. You think about it, is whenever you bring up somebody from the first start or two in the majors, is a lot of times they'll be like, oh my god, this guy's amazing, he completely dominated the other team. It's because nobody has a scouting report on them.
Right.
So just pure arm versus hitter, you have the advantage. And in the history of baseball, is like getting a hit 30% of the time is a career Hall of Fame type number.
Yeah.
So it's the essence of baseball is the pitcher has the advantage. So yeah, these quadruple A type pitcher is going to be more valuable than a quadruple A hitter, unless he's just a stunning exceptional fielder, and he brings something that where that's regardless of what level you're playing at, you're a good fielder, you're a good fielder. But a quadruple A level hitter that could be just a disaster. That could be like a 220 batting average in the majors.
Right, and think about over the years before, like, the Madden, Theo, Rizzo, Bryant era. Think about, like, we had so many quadruple A players, whether it was Micah Hoffpower or Coy Hill. Like, I think those are two just prime examples of a quadruple A position player, because Coy Hill's numbers in Triple A were awesome. Micah Hoffpower's numbers were awesome in Triple A. Coy Hill was not very good in the big leagues. And Micah Hoffpower, I mean, he hit like 20 home runs one year, but he wasn't really a great hitter. So I think those kind of guys were really common with the Cubs kind of before this era, position-wise. But now we're focusing on that with the pitchers, and that is something good that they can develop.
Yeah, and the Cubs also had a trade, kind of bringing in a similar type guy. Is the Cubs traded they traded for right-handed pitcher Alec Mills from Kansas City for Donnie Deweese. And Mills had his major league debut in 2016, and he had a really solid season before that, split between Double-A and Triple-A. In 125 major or minor league innings, he had a 3.22 ERA with a 9 strikeout per 9 innings and 2.2 walks per 9 innings, and a pretty decent ground ball rate. This was a trade that I think was kind of a win-win for both teams, because both prospects seemed like they weren't like top level guys in the farm system, but both guys were when you had some people looking from outside the box views of the farm system, both guys were guys that were like, I like them a lot. I think they can do something in the future if this and this happens. And so Kansas City needed outfielders, Cubs needed pitchers, and same type level guys. I think it was a pretty good trade for both teams, as a change of scenery type thing.
I agree, and a change of scenery is kind of an underrated thing at times. I think it really does make a difference for some players. So, hopefully it works out best for both teams, like you said. That also kind of reminds me that Jason Hamill finally found a home in Kansas City.
That was part of the reason is they signed Jason Hamill, and they didn't have the need for, a room for this guy. So it was kind of like, all right, well, he's a guy that's ascending in our minor league system. We can part ways with him. But it's nice to see the Cubs bringing in unknown type players, younger players, with things that they're identifying as key attributes to the system. And
absolutely.
In addition
to
that,
keep refreshing, keep that same track that you've been going.
Yeah, and on that same note is they were on hand the other day to watch free agent right-hander Seth Manis work out. Seth he's 28, and he had a torn ulnar collateral ligament last summer, and he underwent a procedure, and it's you can do like a Tommy John type surgery to repair that, but he instead did some experimental that they call primary repair surgery. That's experimental, and they say if it works out, it's going to be better off than a Tommy John surgery. So it's going to be interesting to see what they think about him, because he's a guy who's heading right into his prime at 28, and he's had some decent numbers, and he's got a major league ready arm. He could step right in and be at the back of the rotation guy.
Sure, yeah. And I mean, imagine how big it would be to say, hey, here's a surgery that is a better alternative to Tommy John, because we all know when you get Tommy John surgery, you're done for the year. You're done for an entire year from baseball activity. I mean, how many pitchers have we seen over the years miss entire seasons because of Tommy John surgery? So it would be pretty big for baseball.
It's funny, Tommy John, like, when I was a kid, Tommy John was like around the same era as if somebody said, oh, they got cancer, everyone just looked in horror like they were a dead man walking. With Tommy John, you looked at them like they were career dead. It's like, oh man, Tommy John, he's done. Oh, the career over. And now, like, you know, college, like, you know, top end high school pitchers and college pitchers, they hope that they get the Tommy John surgery right out of the way. They're like, oh, let me tear it and get it out of the way, because statistically you have a stronger arm after that Tommy John surgery. But if you have to get a second one, that's where it becomes a, you know, complete catastrophe. So it's the way people look at it now. It's like it's a rite of passage. Like, well, you got to tear your a ligament and get a Tommy John surgery.
Yeah, it is kind of funny how that works now.
But one last thing with baseball is, I don't know if you read this, but Major League Baseball has suggested that for extra inning games to speed up baseball, they want to start extra innings with a runner on second base.
No, thank you.
I'm glad you agree, because I heard that and I was like, I heard on the radio, and I was getting out of my car, and I turned the engine off as I was hearing it, and I was like, did I hear that right? So I sat in the parking lot at my job on my phone trying to find an article that talked about it so I could read it, because I was like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I can't even believe that. So I'm Googling an article, and I understand you're trying to speed up the game a little bit, but extra innings are exciting. And, you know, there's other things you can do to speed up a game. Like when you change pitchers is make it, you can only change pitchers X number of times. So you don't get these, well, we're going to bring in this guy for this guy for this guy, and this guy for this guy. And those, every time you bring in a pitcher is he's got to warm up and you go to a commercial break. That takes forever.
Right. Cut that down. Cut the time down. Make a time limit.
Yeah. You know, you could only do X number of pitch outs in an at-bat. I don't know. There's other things you can do that won't affect the integrity of the game. But putting a guy on second base, that's just, number one is, this is a sport where the records, the individual records, have an important career historical meaning. And if you start putting guys on second right off the bat in the extra innings, people are gonna be like, well, you have to start putting an asterisk next to RBIs, because people are gonna have
an on-base percentage and runs scored and OPS. That's gonna affect everything.
Yeah, and pitchers are gonna be like, that's gonna affect our ability to make money, because if we're pitching in extra innings and we give up a single that scores a run right off the bat, that where, you know, in another season we could have just worked around that and got out of the inning without anything. Yeah, that's going to be impactful on them. It's bad. I think it's a poor. It's not the extra innings that are driving people crazy. No, extra innings are exciting. It's the first 9 innings where they need to speed it up. Right. It's bad for the integrity of the game. It's bad for the historical view of the game, and baseball is at a really popular point right now. It's made a huge comeback from, you know, the strike, the big strike of the 90s, and they need to do things to speed up the game, and they need to be better about attracting the youth. And I think by doing some of the things we just suggested, where, you know, limit the number of pitch outs, limit the number of in-game pitcher switches in an inning, those are going to be helpful. Being able to you know, how the NFL has that red zone thing is, if you have runners on second and third or something, have that be, if you have the MLB package, that game pops up and you could switch over and be like, oh man, this team's about to score. Do more of Vine or tweets with, big plays to draw in the youth that are absorbing. They're not watching whole games.
They're slowly doing more and more of that.
That's how you make the game more exciting. You're not gonna get a casual fan to sit down and watch a whole baseball game that's 3.5 hours if you cut it down from 3.5 hours to 3 hours and 15 minutes. That's not any more attractive to a casual fan.
Right.
So
exactly. And like when you think about, a runner at second and we're trying to walk it off, it's going to be like the same strategy every time. All right, just bunt him over and then swing.
Yeah.
What's the fun in that?
It's I think just a bad rule. Hopefully Rob Manfred seems like a very reasonable guy. So far I've liked his tenure, the short tenure so far as MLB commissioner. So hopefully he gets the message and this doesn't become a reality.
Yeah, I think right now, he's fairly new and he's brainstorming all these ideas and he's trying to see what could potentially work, what could potentially not work, what fans would potentially like, what fans would potentially not like. And when you're trying to make changes to the game like this, it's going to take some trial and error. It's going to take some thinking and rethinking. And with that, that's going to take, it's not going to happen in a week or a few days or one season. It's going to take multiple seasons. You got to give them kind of time to develop what is in best interest of the game, because one decision, obviously a decision's not going to be liked by everybody, and sometimes a decision can be made and you think, well, we like the path of this decision, but let's tweak it a little bit. And you can only do that by seeing how it goes via trial and error. So, it takes time to make these kind of changes.
Yeah, I mean, I could think of the hockey rule change where they changed it to 3-on-3 in overtime, where fans were livid. I don't know anybody that right off the bat was like, this is a good idea. I like this. But I think most everybody is like, all right, I like this. This has been a good thing.
I love it. I loved it in the AHL. I love it now in the NHL.
So let's switch gears and talk about the one last sport. That's the Bears. Not a ton, but a few interesting things. A report came out where the Jets had pretty much said that they have no interest in trading for Jay Cutler. Not super surprising, but I said on an episode not too long ago that there wasn't a very high % chance that the Bears could find a trade partner for Jay Cutler, but they had a handful of reasonable trade options potentially for Jay Cutler. Right. And I thought the Jets were one because they have a good defense. They have a decent offense. They just need a quarterback. And if that could be an NFL ready quarterback, even though we're sick of him here, that's an option there where they could just plug and play. But they said they're not interested. So it's looking more and more like they're either going to have to keep him or cut him. So
it's hard to cut that salary.
I mean, they're at the point now where they can cut him, and it's not that big. It's actually a cap savings.
It is at this point, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So now they're at the point where they can just do it. But it's looking at possibilities for a trade. Jets out. The Hail Marys would be the Dolphins, because he performed so well under Adam Gase, and Ryan Tannehill doesn't seem to be the answer there. And they've got money, so that's a Hail Mary where they could bring him there, and he, under Adam Gase, if he performed like that with the team the Dolphins have, they're actually a much, much better team.
Even so, I have trouble seeing that for some reason. I just don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's why I called it a Hail Mary. Another Hail Mary would be the Bills, because they seem to be tired of Tyrod Taylor, and they don't have, a lot of options at the quarterback position is, would they take a risk there to trade for Jay Cutler? The Texans would be another one because Brock Osweiler is not clearly the answer, and they're going with Tom Savage at quarterback. The big obstacle there is you can't pay two big money quarterbacks.
No.
And the other one I said was, clearly I wrote this earlier in the week when I took notes. I was like, the Arizona Cardinals if Carson Palmer decides to retire. And the other day, it was a Wednesday or Thursday, he announced he's coming back. So that one's an out. The only realistic possibilities left are the Browns and the 49ers.
Yeah, now, of the ones you listed in the Hail Mary, I think the most reasonable one in that kind of group would be the Bills. But I think overall, the Browns, you never know what they're doing. They could do it, Why not? They're the Browns. And with the 49ers, who the heck knows what they're going to do? So, it's possible, but, it's so unclear. It's one thing to say you want them to trade Cutler, but to get mad when they don't trade him, because you got to understand, someone's got to want him to trade for him. Can't just say we want to trade him and trade him. Someone's got to want him.
Yeah, it's kind of like when people are like, oh, the Bears should just trade back in the draft. Well, you got to find somebody that's willing to give you market value for your current pick to move back.
Right.
But, what would be fantastic, I don't see it happening, but, one of those teams flip-flopping first-round picks with the Bears in exchange for Cutler. I don't see it happening, but that would be fantastic.
Could you imagine if that happened?
The Bears would be celebrated as heroes.
They would probably throw a party. Fans would probably throw a party if that happened. They would act like the Bears won the Super Bowl.
Yeah. And then also this week is the Bears sent out letters to all the season ticket holders increasing the price of season tickets for next season.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? Every article I've seen of that, the cover photo is a picture of a very empty Soldier Field from the Redskins game on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, and this is, they're raising the prices for tickets where you're already paying for 2 preseason games, which is so, I can't believe that they forced the fans to have to pay for those preseason games. That should not absolutely be something that they're charging fans that much money for. It should be half the price.
Go to those?
I mean, I like going to the preseason, but
for the most part,
for the money, if you're like, oh, the tickets are $20 or $25, okay, I'm fine with that. But if you're like, they're $75, $100, well, I'm not okay with that. That's too much money.
Yeah, I mean, my friend, well, not my friend, my dad's coworker has had season tickets for a while. And the only Bears games I've been to are preseason because he gave us preseason tickets. And you watch a preseason game, I don't mind watching when I'm there. But let's face it, most people leave after halftime because it's a bunch of no-names playing. Why would you want to pay $100 for that?
Yeah. And also they're raising tickets. And if you think about this, over the last 3 NFL seasons, the Bears have 6 home wins.
Mm-hmm. Yep. They're one of the worst home teams in football.
So, I mean, that's just abysmal that's what they're doing to the fans.
Don't be shocked if the opening game is not sold out.
Yeah. And then another point is, sort of tempering fans' expectations, because I'm hearing more and more fans talk about the Bears drafting a quarterback number 3 overall. And even, who's the guy that does the midday show? David Kaplan on ESPN. David Kaplan the other day, I was like, how are you a professional broadcaster who's been covering sports for this long, this silly about it? Is he kept saying, what if you're passing on, what if Deshaun Watson becomes, Tom Brady? I'm like, what if he becomes Vince Young? Like, you don't know. That's the thing,
Right.
is if you knew Deshaun Watson was going to be Tom Brady, then you know what? He would go to the Browns. If everybody knew that he was going to be Tom Brady, he would be going to the Browns
Right.
with the number
Exactly.
one pick. It's all a crapshoot. You don't know. And Mike Mayock came out and he reiterated my point about drafting a quarterback in the top 10, and he said he would be scared to death to draft a quarterback this year in the top 10. And that's my point, is there's things I see from these handful of guys that are probably going to go in the first round, Deshaun Kaiser, Mitch Trubisky, and Deshaun Watson, but there's things I've seen that I've liked from these guys, but overall, they've got a lot of holes there's too many question marks for me to be confident with to want to pick them number 3 overall. This offseason is going to define Ryan Pace's career, is how he handles the quarterback situation and what he does with the number 3 pick. And if he goes out and goes, well, I'm just going to draft a quarterback, and you end up drafting a Vince Young kind of guy, or just a Ryan Leaf, then Ryan Pace is going to be out of a job, and it's going to be hard for him to find another job in this league at that level.
Yeah.
So it's scary.
At this point, when people talk about, what they should do with quarterbacks and blah, blah, blah and whatnot, I'm just thinking the Bears have kind of this set philosophical, at least from what we've heard, from what we can gather. Now, I'm not Ryan Pace, I'm not John Fox, but from what we've gathered is that they are very take best available. And what's best available at number 3 if they don't trade? Defensive players. I still think that's the route they're going to go. I still think they're going to either go after Allen, the defensive end, or one of those safeties that are available. I truly do believe that. Yeah.
Todd McShay mocked Jonathan Allen to the Bears this week as well.
Yes, he did. And it seems to be a popular consensus.
Yeah, I mean, if it makes sense for a Bears need, and it makes sense for best player available, it's like a marriage there, because we could really use another end. That'll be in the interior. It'll be Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, and Jonathan Allen, and that's pretty awesome right there. I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
But another rumor that's circulating would it be worth trading the number 3 pick for Jimmy Garoppolo? And I'm in the camp, no.
I agree.
David Haw was on a roundtable discussion the other day, and he said, well, if Jimmy Garoppolo was in this year's draft, he'd be the clear number 1 pick. And I was like, why? Because he what did he do at Eastern Illinois that made him... I thought he was a stretch in a second round pick. I thought he was like a 3rd to 4th round kind of guy, probably late 3rd, early 4th kind of guy, and he went late 2nd. And so what would have changed to make him the number 1 overall pick? Especially when if you've ever seen Myles Garrett play, is you go, no, that guy's the number 1 pick. So I don't know why Jimmy Garoppolo would be considered the number 1 pick overall in this year's draft if he was there. So I don't see it. If the Bears were to be able to trade a 2nd this year and a 3rd next year and get Jimmy Garoppolo, I still think that's a little bit steep price to pay because of how high their 2nd round pick is. But if your scouting department is happy with him, and the Bears got an extra week of working with him because they did a joint practice the last 2 seasons actually with the Patriots, so they've gotten 2 weeks of up close and personal with Jimmy Garoppolo. If they feel after all that he's the guy, then it seems like a steep price to pay. But if he turns out to be a starting NFL caliber guy, then you got a steal.
Yeah, and here's another thing about that whole issue with Garoppolo. If the Bears were a team that were just missing a quarterback, like that's all they needed to be contenders, it'd be a little more tempting. But the Bears are trying to rebuild, and there are so many other needs they need to rebuild. So that makes that whole move so much more risky. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree, because you need as many draft picks as you can get. But, I mean, quarterbacks are a hot commodity. So if you've identified that Jimmy Garoppolo has the qualities that you want for a starting quarterback and you're comfortable, then I'm still not okay giving up the number 3 pick, because the number 3 pick should be a guy that's going to be a perennial Pro Bowl type guy. But if you can get him for, a package of picks later on, then you make that move.
Right. This to me is not the right position for the Bears to take that risk. This early on in a rebuild, when you need so much more to improve on, it's not the right timing for it.
Yeah. And, we'll just shift gears just quickly. I think the last thing for the show is we're going to cover the offensive guards in this year's draft, a few of them. So for those that are new to the show or, haven't listened in a little bit, is every week from, right around the Super Bowl till before the NFL draft, I take one position and pick a handful of guys who, I'm interested in and sort of evaluate them for how I think they'll perform in the NFL and characteristics I like, don't like, and where I think they'll get picked. And I want this to be interactive, so anybody that has players that they want me to look at, definitely reach out to us and let us know players. I've been keeping a tally, so when I get to that position, I've got a running list of guys that people want to know about. So what I do is I watch actual game film, not highlights or anything, but actual game film. So I see every single snap that they play in a game over multiple games for a season, and sort of I pick out key things that I notice about them, pros, cons, and otherwise notes I see. So this week is offensive guards. Next week will be interior defensive linemen. So there might be a certain future Chicago Bear featured in there. Jonathan Allen, cough, cough, cough. So the first player I looked at this week was Forrest Lamp, 6'4", 305 pounds, out of Western Kentucky. The pros I had on him were he had a really productive college career, longtime starter at Western Kentucky. Although it's a smaller school, he was tested against some of the big programs when he played. So, i.e., he played Alabama this season, and he went up against Jonathan Allen. He has decent footwork, and he's got a little bit of nasty streak in him, which I think as an interior offensive lineman, having that nasty streak is a big plus in my book. I think it can mask a lot of deficiencies that you might have. The cons, he predominantly played left tackle in college. So he's going to have a position change in the NFL because at his size, he's going to be a guard. I would be shocked if he's not a guard in the NFL. But he needs to add upper body strength. You see that a lot with small school in offensive linemen. Is they might have technique, but they don't have good strength training programs in those programs. So he's going to need to add a lot of upper body strength. And he's going to have to work on his leverage. He's 6'4", so he's not that big as a lineman. He should be able to get lower and get below a defensive lineman. The notes I had on him is there's plays where he stood tall against a guy like Jonathan Allen and played really well. But there's plays where he just got beat like a rented mule. He's going to be a little bit of a hard player to gauge where he's going to go. I think his combine numbers are going to tell more of his tale. If he winds up slow, like, his shuttle times are slow, and his, when he runs his sprints, the short time slice of his sprints are slow, and he's shorter than he's listed, or he's under 300 pounds, that's going to be bad news for Forrest Lamp. But if he comes in and he shows a good bench number and he's quick, and his height, weight are good, then I could see him being a second-round pick. The next guy I have is Dorian Johnson, 6'5", 317 out of Pitt. I didn't cover too many guards in this draft because there wasn't a lot of guys I was intrigued with, and I don't think this is a really great guard class like it was last year. But Dorian Johnson, he's a really nimble guy for his size. Not fast, but nimble, quick. He can really pull or go out and block on the second level. I liked that about him. He's got nice driving legs, so he's got power in his lower body. And he was part of a really nice left side of the offensive line for Pitt. The cons, he lacks upper body strength, which, in the offseason, you can really work on that. It's not that big of a deal, but it's going to be something he's going to have to really work hard at to match with his power in the lower body. And he can get a little holdy, like he'll latch on to guys, and if he doesn't break out of that habit real quick, the NFL is going to be merciless against him. The notes I have on him, I love his ability to pull, but my problem with him is when he does pull, he should be able to roll right over a guy that's a linebacker or a defensive back. He should be able to plow right over them and continue on and go to a next block. But his lack of upper body strength is he's not being able to, to use his hands to help drive that guy. That's a downer on him, and that sort of negates some of his athletic ability, is his lack of upper body strength. The next guy I have is Dan Feeney, 6'4", 304 out of Indiana. This guy has got some nasty in him. He can really fight with the best of them, which goes a long way in the NFL. Again, he's another guy with a weak upper body, which is not that uncommon in interior offensive linemen in general in college. And his problem is he lets defensive linemen get into his body, which makes it much easier for them to shed the block. He needs to be able to use his hands better. He has some poor leverage, and he's got a history of concussions, which is bad, offensive lineman. But he ranks really high at guard on a lot of big boards, and I don't know if I see it. Barring him putting up some great combine numbers, I sort of stay away from Dan Feeney because he's too much of an unknown for me.
Hey, he's from Moreland Park.
Is he?
Yeah.
Did he go to Sandberg?
Yes, he did.
That's my high school rival. So I guess I will root for him to do something well, but I'm not a huge fan of his playing ability. Next on my list is Dion Dawkins, 6'5", 318 out of Temple. He looks much more massive than his height weight combo on paper are, which you don't see that often. He looks like a massive man. He's quick for his size. He moves well in all directions, so laterally, forward, backward. And I watched him just engulf defensive linemen. The cons on him are when he's out in space, trying to find somebody to block, he just gets sort of lost, which I get. I played football in high school, and when I had to go out on the second level, it's trying to find who the guy to block is when people are moving around. It's like an instinct that you sort of have to pick up, and he seems to get lost a little bit. As pretty common in this level is he's more leg power than upper body, so he's going to need to work with a strengthening coach. But notes on him is I hear a lot about he's solely a left guard. I actually project him better as a left tackle. He's a lot better suited for the left side of the offensive line. He's either going to be a left guard or a left tackle. But I think he's got the movement to be able to shadow a speed defensive end or a 3-4 edge rusher. I think that's a great spot for him. I see why people want to put him in a guard, because he doesn't go out and block on a second level well. So sticking him in between, defined space between the center and the tackle, sort of, makes that a moot point. But I honestly think if you take Deion Dawkins, he would be a solid middle of the, middle up to the upper echelon, the middle of the road to a little bit above average of left tackle in this league. And I think you could get him in the 3rd, 4th round, where that could be a steal. So he's a sleeper for me who I like, and I wouldn't mind the Bears picking him up.
He's currently number 2 at DraftTech.com's list of guards, so that is somewhat notable, I guess, for them. That clearly people see something in him.
Yeah, I think it's his athletic ability. It's you don't see a guy that big be that athletic a lot of times. The next guy I have is Ethan Posich out of LSU. He is 6'7", 309, which is a weird height-weight combo. It's not that big of a weight, but he's an absolutely ogreish height. Pros, he's a big, strong kid. And he's got plenty of room on his frame to add bulk without losing any of his size and his speed. So he's got a frame that could add muscle to it, no problem. He's got the ability to play center because he played mostly center at LSU. He's got really decent footwork, and he's a powerful driving blocker. So he's a great run blocker because he just uses legs and just drives people. The cons I have on him are he was a center at LSU, but I think he's too tall to be a regular center in the NFL. Usually you like a shorter guy, more compact. So there's not that motion of snapping the ball to the center or to the quarterback and then going out in your block. There's less room for movement when you're a shorter guy. When you're a taller guy, it takes longer because it's longer to reach, your longer arm movements, you're standing up, you're firing out. I don't think it'll work. He's likely going to be a guard or a tackle. I could see him being a right tackle. But he's going to have to work on his leverage a little bit. At 6'7", he stands up tall too much. He's going to end up hurting himself or getting driven back. And he's going to have to add a little bit of bulk to him, which he's got the frame to do. The notes I have, I really like this kid. I think he could play 4 offensive line positions in the NFL. I think he could play everything but left tackle. And I think he could be a starting left guard on a lot of teams day one. So Ethan Posich is a guy I like.
Yeah, I mean, summed up everything here I'm looking, so nothing to add.
And the last guy I picked was Jordan Morgan out of a small town in Pennsylvania, or a small school in Pennsylvania called Kutztown. 6'4", 320 pounds. This guy is an absolute road grader. Huge size. He's listed at guard here. He's probably going to be on the right side in the pros, most likely. The cons on him is he's a D2 player where he had limited competition, and he played left tackle in college, which makes sense because you try to put your best offensive lineman at left tackle, and he was probably the best offensive lineman in all of D2, but he's not anywhere near a left tackle in the pros. He's probably a right guard or a right tackle. My notes on him were he had to have a big Senior Bowl to stand out, and he did. He had a really great Senior Bowl practice and the game. In that week, he greatly improved his draft status. He probably springboarded himself from a 5th or a 6th rounder to probably a 3rd round pick, even maybe a late 2, barring any sort of disastrous numbers at his pro day or combine. I think he's a guy to watch, in the mid rounds. I like his attitude, and I like the way he plays, and I think it transitions well.
Yeah, nothing to add.
So I think that's going to do it for this episode of Bill Swerski Sports Talk Chicago. Like I said, is next week we're going to do defensive linemen. So if you have defensive linemen that you're interested in knowing about, just hit us up, Twitter at Swerski Sports or at ShyFanPat1, or the website is swerskisports.com or facebook.com/swerskisports, and let us know, and we'll make sure to cover that guy. Or if you have any other players, if we haven't done that position yet, we'll add them to the list. And if we've already done it, we'll do a backtrack and look at that guy. And, is there anything you want to add, Alex?
Well, by next week, baseball activities will be started up again. And, we were talking about football, and I don't want to go in much detail about this. It's not a Chicago thing, but boy, what a Super Bowl that was last week. I mean, I just kind of want to get that out there on this show. What a Super Bowl.
Yeah, as quickly as, I don't know if you've seen the meme with the young lady who was on Dr. Phil, where she was like, yeah. cash me outside, how about that? I saw somebody took that video of her on Dr. Phil, and they put Tom Brady's face on it, and looking at Commissioner Goodell, and it was like, cash me outside, how about that?
Yeah, I saw that. As much as I hate that how about that thing, that was pretty funny.
Or the defensive coordinator for the Patriots getting off the plane wearing the Goodell as a clown shirt.
Oh, that was funny. That was funny.
I ordered one of those shirts.
Oh, good. Good. I should get one myself.
Yeah, I ordered one of those, and I ordered one that has it says Firegar Packs. Jimmy, you're cool.
Hey, did you hear about the protest that's going to be apparently organized before a game in early March, I think it is?
No.
Yeah, so I think it's a game against the Clippers, the Bulls at the United Center. There's going to be a big fan protest for Garpax being around.
Oh, that's awesome. I'll have to go to that.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea. I don't know how much of a difference it's really going to make. It probably won't, but it'll at least show that fans truly do care, and they're truly fed up with the way things are going, because they are going terribly.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to bring a recording device and talk to some fans to play clips on the show and ask them their feelings about Garpax.
Yeah, there's an idea right there. Wow.
Yeah, I did it. I did that at the NFL draft, and talked to some fans, and they had some very strong opinions. So it was nice to hear from them.
Oh man, that's awesome.
But yeah, I guess that's gonna do it for this episode. I guess I will talk to you next episode, Alex.
All right, sounds good.
And thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, bear down.
Cubs win! What a lucky break! The good Lord wants the Cubs to win!
We thank Ditka and God for all they have provided.
Cubs win! Cubs win! Cubs win!
Oh, I don't want her. You can have her. She's a Packer fan.
She can't fit in my van.
And she looks like Remember, New Yorkers, smoking crack is not legal on the plains.
Bears 31 to -7.
Stop Bears!
Oh, when the Bears go bearing